In the sweltering heat of summer 1964, a groundbreaking movement swept Mississippi and the nation. Grounded in the tradition of organizing spanning decades for civil rights. Despite violence and intimidation, coalitions formed past the boundaries of age, race, religion, and gender. Southern leaders and Northern students converged to challenge systemic racism and fight for voting rights. These chronicles led to a pivotal chapter in the American Civil Rights Movement, birthing Freedom Summer 1964.
In 1964, Freedom Summer, I was 13 years old, and it was a time of rebellion. We knew from an early age that there was a problem. There was something about Hattiesburg that made it ripe for what became Freedom Summer. At the time, Mississippi had a black population that was like 40%. When you think about the Constitution, when you think about the Declaration of Independence, that's clear language. But the reality that we had was anything but that.
Freedom Summer basically was a communications tool before we had the ability to spread vast bites of information. One of the ideas behind Freedom Summer was if a bunch of white students come down and put themselves in danger, that the nation would pay attention. You know, it was just a fact of racism. So that Freedom Summer was a way of communicating to the rest of the nation how dangerous it was to fight for rights in Mississippi.
We're commemorating, right, the 60th anniversary of the Freedom Summer of 1964. And we know that this movement did not start in 1964, nor did it end in 1964.
When Emmett Till was killed, his death was seminal for me because he and I were a year apart in age. He was 14, I was 13. And it felt truly personal.
Was that kind of the trigger point for you, if you will?
It was,
getting involved?
yeah, I want to call it today's term, yeah, that triggered my attention on the idea of lynching, frankly. Lynching was something that happened to black people and we didn't talk about it. The women were these wonderful foundational people who did the work and kept things running and kept the lights on, got the music together, groups organized, made sure that the buses were where they needed to be, and generally performed the roles that women always perform when stuff gets done.
Dear Mom, right now I'm sitting in front of a small cafe with about 11 kids from Leake and Madison counties. We are attempting to test the accommodations section of the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, which says there is not to be discrimination in accommodations in restaurants which serve interstate commerce. But each time we come to the cafe, they put a closed sign on the window and lock the door. So today we're staying all day so that no one, black or white, can be served. When we leave, the cafe is opened up right away. So today we're staying and they can't open up. We're doing some very interesting work here. Yesterday we spent the afternoon canvassing the area to tell people about opportunities for school integration this year. Grades 1 to 3 and grade 12 will be integrated in this county. By 1967, it is a federal law that all grades be integrated, but many people are afraid to send their kids to school because the white people will fire them and take away their loans and harass their kids. But it is important for the kids to get a good education.
Willie, my friend Willie, was shot at because he went out in the rural areas around Macon to register people, and he was shot at. It was scary to think about. We had experiences with people like that. We had one young Baptist minister and his wife from Minnesota working with our group. And there was a young volunteer black girl in our office, and he drove her home one night. He stopped with this young girl, and they went and got a soda. And when he came outside, 3 of his tires were slashed. And he told her to get in the car. She went in the car and locked the car. And he went to a telephone booth to call the office for help. And I was in the office. And he got dragged out of the phone booth and beaten up by 3 guys. And I called everybody, and and the police, and we just all showed up at this place. And we were able to identify the guys that beat him up. We had witnesses. And we went to court. We filed a complaint and went to court, and the judge heard our story and heard from our witnesses, and then he heard their story, and they said, oh, he started the fight. And the judge says, conflicting stories, case dismissed.
And this kid, who was no older than me, I mean, I was just 18 at the time, and he was no older, but he was driving a lime green Ford F-150 pickup truck with the rifle on the rack in the back, and he took the rifle down and pointed it at my head. And the first thing I thought of was, I gotta go to the bathroom. I was just that afraid. But something kept me staring him down. And I was like, I'm not afraid of you. I was scared shitless, but I didn't let him know that. And I think he got afraid of me because he put his rifle back on the rack and just drove off. And then I was like, okay, I can breathe.
Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier flying down to Greenwood, Mississippi with 3 bags of cash. The total, I believe, was about $100,000. There were a lot of fundraising activities in New York, and the money was needed for things like bail funds. When 220 people were arrested, we spent a week in jail, black, white, male, female, and it took a lot of money to get us out. So the bail money was very important. And so Harry and Sidney flew down in a private plane into the Greenwood County, Greenwood City airport, and they were met by some SNCC people, and they drove to a church, the largest black church there, and they spoke. Meanwhile, the Klan knew they were coming. I don't know how that happened, but they knew they were coming. So they were waiting as well. So it was kind of like a chase from the plane into the cars, and to the church, and they delivered the money. And they both got to speak. I remember a little bit of Harry's speech. He got up and he spoke and he said, I have never felt love before like I feel in this room tonight. And he meant it.
When I went south in 1964, I was 19 years old. I was just finished my freshman year at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and I was from White Plains, New York. The training in Ohio was both physical, on how to respond nonviolently to provocation, and emotional, a great deal of role playing, a great deal of what we would call sociological, anthropological education, because a lot of us did not know the culture we were going into.
Okay, this is our group in Macon, Georgia. Joel Siegel here. And this is Willie Leventhal, the guy I played Little League Baseball with and went to school with. This is a photograph of the Emeritus March. Dr. King and Mrs. King in the middle. Here's standing right, excuse me, right here. Stokely Carmichael was on the march, along with other civil rights leaders.
Well, I was in Mississippi when Medgar Evers got killed, and actually I was in Southwest Georgia when Reverend Lee got killed. So people getting killed per se was not new. Now, I knew Mickey Schwerner pretty well. They went to Oxford, Ohio for training for what became Freedom Summer.
And all it was 3 civil rights workers, are missing. That was also when you really realized that just the idea that they were missing was enough to be very, very afraid. The car was found and it was realized that, yeah, they were not missing, they were dead.
One afternoon, I was standing out near our office in Greenwood, and this white guy came up to me. A gentleman, 40 years old, wearing a suit, started talking to me. He said, "Are you one of those freedom people," or whatever he called me. And I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, you know what happened to your friends, right?" And I said, "No, what happened to them?" And he went like this with his hand across his throat, that they were killed. And he says, "You know what's going to happen to you?" I said, "No, what's going to happen to me?" He went, did the same thing. And it didn't impact me. Although I remember the story, obviously. I guess we were just so committed. Yeah. There was something larger than us that was at stake.
Mickey got a call from Neshoba County that Mount Zion Church had been burnt down. That's a church he was working with. So he had to come down to check that out. He left the training early. He brought Andy with him, just as a buddy. But they all went to check out the church. When they didn't call in, we knew something bad had happened. So we knew that they were killed the minute they didn't call in. Mickey was very disciplined and did everything correctly. I helped search for their bodies. The state of Mississippi, particularly Senator Eastland, was saying that it was a hoax. Senator Eastland was going around the state saying that the 3 civil rights workers were voluntarily disappeared and probably laughing it up on Moscow Gold in a New York hotel room. What he was saying, they're Jewish communists. New York was Jewish and Moscow Gold, a bunch of communists. In order to sustain this myth that he was trying to sell, he gave a speech in the Senate about myself and some other Jewish people who were organizers, talking about that the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement was run by a bunch of communists, and therefore the disappearance was a hoax.
The civil rights movement, the organizing, strategizing, could not have taken place without the support of the Black church.
I've always believed in God, and I've always believed that that higher power is something I have inside of me, and I can trust it to follow a righteous path. And it was very affirming when I would go to the church. They would sing the songs and I'd start crying because I would feel it.
Whether it's Sunday, high noon, or Monday through Saturday, the Black church has always been there for Black people.
Religion, spirituality played a major role in what we did, because even though we were living in a situation of deprivation, there was no excuse allowed for your conduct being anything but above reproach. The idea of God being the ultimate judge of what happens to us, that was foremost in our minds. It was drilled into us. Sunday school, church after Sunday school, prayer meetings, Baptist Young People's Union. All of these were part of the interior culture that we had in the black community.
I learned a respect for religion as a political power and as a social force in Mississippi. And in fact, it sent me back to college to start taking religion courses and learning more about religion and the role of religion. Like anything else, it can be a very powerful force for social change. It can also be a very powerful force against social change.
I was brought up to believe that a mensch, a full human being, one of the things a mensch did was to fight for justice. And that's comes from 3 generations back. My grandparents back in Russia were fighters against the Tsar. And then when they moved here, they continued fighting for union rights, for advancement, and my parents were like that. And also, I was brought up to believe that Jewishness, one of the prime things that God calls on you to do, calls on all Jews to do, is to fight for justice. It was part of the religion.